Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. Happy Saturday to you. Hello to everyone. Hi, Mario. Feels good, doesn't it? How's everyone doing? Doing well on this Saturday? Hey, Julie. Hey, Tiffany. Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's a whole new kind of show today, which is fun. I'm looking forward to it. Hello, Jana. Hello, Kathy. How are you? Hey, Sarah. So, yes. Oh, Kath. Hello, Kath. Probably cool. Hey, Louisa, how are you? So welcome to a Saturday fun. This is going to be fun. I think it's going to be fun anyway. I hope you guys do as well. We'll talk about like a whole new format, a whole new kind of series that, I don't know, just thought would be fun to do on YouTube. Hello to everyone. Hey, Stacy. Hey, Teresa. Gosh, there's a lot of people here. It's impressive. Pretty crazy. So I'll tell you a little bit. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Gosh, from all over the place. I'll talk a little bit and then we'll kind of get into like the show because this is the first one, as I mentioned, the first in a series. So the plan is, hey, Roseanne, the plan is to actually do these on a more frequent basis, but I'll just kind of give you the premise of this idea that I had. And truth is, I've had this idea kind of rolling around in my head for a long time, but now I have the time to do it. So we're really excited just to kind of chat and hopefully answer your questions. So typically throughout lives, and I'll say YouTube lives for years now, there's always been some type of agenda, be that a product release or showing makes, or maybe I want a demo, or like when we did Valentine's last month. That's really kind of the premise of that, where I prep and do a lot of things and I want to share content on lives. And I do my best throughout the lives to pay attention to the chat. I know Mario does as well. Hey, Kuber. Hey, Susan. Hey, Donna. I do my best to try to answer questions throughout the live, but at the same time, I'll admit it's very challenging because I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm trying to remember what I want to say, and I see those questions, and if they happen to kind of jive with what I'm doing, I'll answer them throughout the live. But I feel like there's often times where people join the live and everybody has a different skill set, a different skill level, a different time or length of how long you've been making. And sometimes you'll join a live and you'll have a question, or maybe you don't even ask the question because you think like, well, I don't even know what he's talking about. I don't want to ask the question. And I think it would be great just to do a series where not only can I answer questions that we get often, because we get questions, of course, from Facebook or Instagram, or if people DM or email questions, we try to answer that. But there's often questions that we get asked very frequent. It's like, okay, well, how about if I do a series where I can answer questions that have been asked, but at the same time, for those of you that are joining live, you have the opportunity to ask questions and I will answer those during the live. And some of them will be very conversational, like this, where it's just, I can explain the answer to the question. Or the other times it could be a demo where you're like, it's easier for me to answer in a demo. So I have a demo set up. Now, the way I see it going moving forward is it would be very specific, very product specific. And it's not always going to be Ranger. It's not always going to be about ink or paint or something. It might be about stamps, or it might be about stencils, or it might be about background stamps in particular. It might be about ideology, where I just talk about the differences between ephemera, layers, and baseboards, because I get asked that a lot, or just different types of adhesive. It's something that I want to do probably within an hour to an hour and a half, but because this was the first one, I wanted to throw a big net out there and just say distressed products. And so, of course, behind me, the table is pretty much has a little bit of every distressed product. I'm still going to keep this one as short as possible, but know that depending, he's already laughing, but knowing how this one goes, we'll take deeper dives into things. So you'll see future Asked and Answered where we might just do distressed crayons, distressed glaze. So it's almost like the Q&A that I did back during pandemic, but that was really more of a demo where I already had a demo plan. And this, of course, is just more engaging into the thing. I'm not going to sit around and wait for questions because I have things that I want to get into right away. But of course, you can ask questions during the live and we will answer it. The only thing that I want to remind you of is that this series, there will always be a topic. And so I'm going to only focus or ask and answer on a topic, because this is, we might just do an Asked and Answered where it's like an anything goes series where you can just show up and ask whatever questions. But, you know, often if we're talking about, say, distress and someone's like, oh, can you tell me about a physics thing? It's like, well, no, because right now we're talking about distress, and it just derails my train of thought and probably everyone else. So that's kind of that's the gist of what it's going to be. It's just going to be a fun opportunity, and I hope you find this entertaining, maybe, beneficial, hopefully, educational, that if you have those questions, even if it's down to the basics, that you can get them asked in this series. So this way, when you see that asked and answered, you'll kind of know what type of live that's going to be. It's not going to be the only type of live that I do. I'm still going to just do demos, or still do, you know, maybe seasonal like we did for Valentine's, where it might have makes, all types of things. This is just a series I wanted to add to what I already do because we have the time to do it. So there you go. All right. Hello, Marina. Hello, Simon Says Stamp. Oh yeah, I see that. Yeah, there's a lot of sales. They have 25% off Ranger. That's even a perfect time today. We ready to go, Mario?
We are ready. Everything is working.
He's got his phone here. He's over here because he hasn't popped his head in yet. I know it's a little wobbly.
Hello.
Well, there he is. Yeah, I was telling him, like, I'm gonna keep this short, and he's like, really? I'm like, well, okay, it's never gonna be this 45-minute hour thing, but really I am gonna shy away from those 3-hour things.
Yeah.
Have faith in me. Have faith in me, really.
Totally.
Come on, you gotta like cheer me on for this hour and a half. I think hour and a half is probably a good time for me, but who knows? This one, I'm not making any promises because, like I said, I did make the category way too broad for this. But I just wanted to kind of at least see how this is going to play out. It's new to me. It's new to him. It's new to you guys, and really see how this goes. All right. So we'll just start.
There you go. Have fun.
Thanks. I see already, just from a question perspective, and Mario's going to do his best to help me because I said I'm not going to be able to see all the questions, and so I'm just going to focus when I see one. There you go. So the first one that I'm reading is about, let's see. My question about distressed products: are all products still available in the full color line? The answer to that is no. Because first of all, not all the products were ever made in the full palette. You know, like Archival was never made in all the colors. Embossing Glaze was never made in all the colors. When we did distressed paint, that was the only category that at one time had the colors, and then Ranger retired some of the colors, brought them back for a limited time. So who knows if now they'll end up, you know, filling that line and keeping it full. But for the rest of it, as far as like inks, re-inkers, all of that, yes, ink pads, re-inkers, spray stains, and oxide spray do have the full palette. But like Distress Spritz is not the full palette. So kind of a tricky question to answer. So that's good. What was that?
Your current.
Okay, good deal. All right, perfect. Well, if I don't see anything, I'm just going to jump over. So I'm going to jump over and just talk about something else. Can I spray spritz on vellum? You can put Distress Spritz on anything you want. And as long as it's got some tooth, it will dry and it will hold on. But of course, the slicker the surface, the more that pigment's going to flume off. And so what you'll find in this is a lot of technique questions like that. My advice to you, of course, is to try it, because even vellum, like that question, there's so many different types of vellum, so many different types of thicknesses of vellum. Some are slicker than others, some have more tooth. So even if I answered it here, the vellum you might have, it might work, it might not. So anytime you have a question about will this work, you should try it. That would be my question to you. I'm going to jump over and just talk real quick about, I just saw that, better result, re-ink or refresher. Thanks, XJade. I'm going over because we're going to talk about that. That's a really great start on that. And Mario, if you can queue up any questions, that'd be great. I'll do my best. But we're going to talk, because I actually have that ready, because that is one of the most asked questions. Re-inker, refresher. So look at that. I even brought in some tins. Typically, I don't have my stuff in tins in the studio when I work, because I just like to have products. So we'll talk about that. So the question was, what is better, re-inkers or a refresher? And maybe you don't even know the difference between the two, so I'll talk about that. So I've got some Distress ink pads, Distress Oxide pads, Distress ink re-inkers, and Distress Oxide re-inkers. And then the product, the kind of mystery product of what is this stuff. Let me just pull this around. I've got so much stuff everywhere.
You need anything?
No, I'm good. I'm just trying to make room for myself and for my headspace, because I do have a lot of stuff that's a little bit everywhere. Okay, so when it comes to product, I'm just making myself a little space. Let's look around. I've got this, I've got that. Okay, Mario's doing really good keeping me organized, you guys. I am doing my best. Okay, got my towel. I feel good about this. Whew. Let me open this up. And I'll just talk differences. See, that's the thing. I bring it in camera and then I got no place to go. There we are. We happy there? Happy there? Mario, I am looking for, just looking for my container of mediums. I don't know where I put it already. Oh, here it is. It's in here. Okay. So I have a little bit of stuff everywhere. There we go. That'll keep me going. So Distress ink, Distress Oxide. We're not going to talk about the differences because the question really was about re-inker and refresher. Okay, so let me pull out refresher. Yeah, I just put all my little mediums in. Like these are the oddities of Distress, like Micro-Glaze and resist spray and refresher. Those are the things that people ask a lot. Okay, so what is refresher, first of all? So refresher really is like this resin. It's a component that goes into ink pads. It's what actually keeps things moisturized. Now this is for water-based products. So right away you would have to know, well, you know, does it work on this brand ink pad, this brand ink pad? I can't answer that because I don't know about that. But when it comes to water-based inks, that's what this refresher is for. It could also work on certain mediums. Like sometimes I've used it in texture paste or I've used it with paint. But typically if I need to like reconstitute something like that, I would start with water over refresher. I pretty much use refresher on my ink pads if I need it, or markers. It works really great on water-based markers as well. The resin, when we talk about that, if you were to put this on your fingers, if you were just to spray it out, okay, I'm just gonna spray a little bit, then I have my cloth here, I don't want to put too much, okay? It's kind of oily, but I wouldn't say it's like baby oil because it will evaporate and it starts to get a little tacky. Because this sprayable resin is what will add moisture to the surface of a water-based medium. And it does work on other inks for sure. It does work, you know, as long as it's water-based, you need to be sure that you understand that. I've even done techniques where I've used this on paper. It's very cool on paper because it turns it into leather. And there's a lot of different techniques. I've even done videos where we do a deeper dive on just refresher. So to answer the question, when do you refresh versus re-ink? Look, you know how long you've had your product. You know how long you've used your product. You know what you do with your product. Do you stamp with it? Do you blend with it? Do you do a lot of techniques where you're squishing the ink out of the ink pad? If you're using your product, then the answer is you need to re-ink it because you've used the ink. But if you don't use your product often and it's in storage, or maybe you live in a very dry, warm climate like we do, and you haven't used it and you go to use it and it just doesn't seem to kind of work right, refresher will often bring the pad to life. So let me just explain maybe the expectancy of ink. How about we do that? Okay, I'm just gonna take a few ink pads out just to start of each one. And this will be quick. This isn't gonna be a 30-minute answer to this question, but it does spark a lot, so I can kind of put a lot of information into this one thing. Okay. How do you know if you need to re-ink or refresh? Here's my suggestion / warning to you. There are certain ink pads on the market that are made differently and their formulation is designed to be very juicy. Also, like the delivery system. Distress ink and Oxide are a felt pad, meaning there is a felt. You can see that little fuzzy edge all the way around. It's a very compressed felt, just like you would think in the craft store, but different, but that same kind of fibrous thing. And then it has a piece of fabric laminated to the top. The fabric is what keeps all those little fuzzies from getting off on everything, like on your paper and on your hands and your stamps and all that. So we want to have that fabric layer. But not every dye ink pad has that. You've seen dye ink pads probably in the industry that are foam. And that delivery system, when you press it on the paper, it is like tons of ink. I didn't want my ink to be like that. So I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's just really, I think, what the designer wanted. Distress was always meant to be very controlled when it comes to applying the color. So when you're using the ink, it's really understanding what an ink pad should do. A lot of times people will get an ink pad and they'll put it on a paper like that and go, look, my ink pad's dry. Look, I'm putting it on there, it's dry. Well, no, The ink doesn't just sit on the surface waiting to be used. It is suspended in here like a wet kitchen sponge. So there's actually a lot of ink in an ink pad if you press down, okay? Now, because this is a fabric, you're gonna get the most ink when you push down. If this was foam, it would just be super juicy. Sometimes people over ink their ink pads, and what happens is when you over ink it, then it gets all over your stamp, it does all sorts of nonsense. So if I felt like, okay, you know what, this one feels a little dry, I wanna refresh it, it's not gonna hurt it if you refresh. Even if you refresh a brand new ink pad, it's not going to hurt it. Here's how you apply the refresher. You simply take it to spray, and you spray it on the surface of the ink pad. It can go on Oxide, or it can go on that. But Oxide, you would do like one spray on an Oxide, okay? Ink, you could probably get away with 2 sprays of that. It just puts in this like little moisture, this resin. You put the lid on, you can wipe off any excess that maybe got on the case, and you're gonna wait just a few minutes. I would say anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes for this to rehydrate the ink pad, and then you're good to go. How often can you refresh it? Well, as often as you want, as long as when you refresh it, it actually brings the ink back to life. Now, I'm not gonna wait because 2 or 3 minutes in this live will eat up the time, but right away you can see when you push down how much juicier this ink pad was than when I did exactly the same thing before it was refreshed. So if you like that, if you always want that juicy pad, well, you can refresh until you really don't get much color out. That's when people say, well, how do I know when I shouldn't refresh anymore and I need to re-ink it? Well, because when you press it down, if you're not getting the color that you want, you're out of ink. You need to re-ink the ink pad. So let's just talk about that. If you wanted to re-ink an ink pad, or you needed to, and we'll talk both ink and Oxide, okay? It's important to know that there are different re-inkers, and a re-inker is, let me see if I have vintage photo. Yep, I do. So a re-inker for distress inks are in glass bottles. Re-inkers for distress Oxide, those are in small plastic bottles that are shaken. Let's see if I have cracked pistachio. I do, cool. Because these need to be shaken up, because this is a fusion of dye and pigment. Distress ink doesn't have to be shaken up, so that's why one is in a glass dropper and one is in this. If we tried doing this, but if you put a glass ball in there, it will shatter the glass. So I've got Oxide re-inkers. These fit great in an alcohol ink storage tin. Fits great. And then, of course, the re-inkers, these will fit in the multi-storage tin. And these little rings, Kubert actually made these for me. This is from Ranger's website. You can print them out just on cardstock, use 2 different circle punches, and then you slide them right over the dropper. And then you can see what your colors are. It's really convenient. I do like that. All right. So to re-ink an ink pad, you need the matching re-inker and the matching formula that you're re-inking. I know that seems obvious, but that's important. You also need some type of scraper. It could be a credit card, a piece of plastic. I'm just using a tonic scraper. There's no real right or wrong answer to how much ink, because everybody has a different preference. But typically, if you're doing an ink pad, you remove the glass top, squeeze the dropper, put it into the bottom, release it to suck up ink into the dropper. And then you're going to just essentially squeeze the dropper as you're dragging it back and forth. I'll come a little closer just so you can see. So I'm not applying a big puddle in the middle. I'm actually just trying to use that dropper and spread that ink wherever I want this to be. And some people, believe it or not, they re-ink brand new ink pads because they prefer their inks a little juicier. Maybe you're doing backgrounds all the time, or maybe you like a wetter ink blend. So that's what I'm saying. It's really up to the maker as to how wet or dry. When people go, oh, my ink pads are dry. Well, not really. They all get made to a standard. They're all weighed to a specific standard. It just depends on how wet you want it to be. And more importantly, are you pressing down on it or just dragging it? Because if you're not pressing down on an ink pad, you're never going to get ink out of it. Then all I'm going to do is take my scraper and I'm going to press and drag across the ink pad. Okay, so I'm going to go that way. I'm going to turn the ink, go that way. What this is doing is it's actually pushing the ink down into that felt and spreading it out. If you didn't do that, and this is really with any ink pad, if you didn't do that, wherever you drizzled that, it would stay like that. So if you did like a back and forth drizzle and you went to go and actually ink a stamp, you would see darker ink applied to the stamp very randomly, because ink is a suspended medium. So if you don't push that into the ink, and I just do this a couple times, it doesn't take long, then your ink is going to stay suspended. Now, ink pads are meant to be used. So this is a felt laminate. So see how those little corners turn up? Who cares? It's just an ink pad. That's it. If the ink comes out of the case, well, then that's a Ranger thing and you need to contact them. But as far as the felt, it's just a little laminate that stays on there, and that's not a problem. Once you re-ink it, typically you're good to go, but I, again, like to wait the, kind of 3 to 5 minutes just for everything to have a minute to breathe, okay? Oxide, same thing, except you need to shake it. Now, because it doesn't have a dropper, you've kind of seen that you just do the little back and forth drizzle on the ink. So I just, on Oxide, because see, Oxide comes out way faster, I just do one time across and that's enough for me. I can always go back and add more, but man, if you over ink an ink pad, then when you go to use it, like on a stamp and there's just ink everywhere, it just creates a mess. I just want to make sure that the ink is off of that scraper, and I'm just going to, same thing, drag it across, drag it across, drag it across, drag it across. It's easy to do. Some people, they even do like spa days for their ink pads, where they just sit there and go, you know what, everyone's going to get a drink. Doesn't matter if I use them all equally, or maybe you're just doing it for the colors that you use the most, you can do that. Now, the one thing to also remember, if you're a fan of minis, which are great, you need to make sure that these get re-inked frequently, because these do not have the same amount of ink in here. They have about 1/5 the amount of ink. They're great for travel, they're great for all sorts of things, but you need to make sure that when you're using it, and people do, especially when they're doing like little backgrounds, you re-ink them frequently, not just refresh them, because they just don't have as much ink as the larger ink pads. So there you go. Whew. Thorough, but I got to talk about refresher and ink and all of those things. So that is good. Yeah, a lot of people need a spa day. All right. Yeah, no kidding. All right. Any questions sticking out in your head, Mario?
A couple I actually.
Okay, go for it. Oh, okay. Then I don't need to. Good. Okay, let's see. Have you ever experienced refresher on watercolor paper before adding watercolors with watercolor pencils? I haven't, Wendy, because it would be fun to try, but putting that on there, it would definitely gives that paper almost like a velvety effect. It's quite strange. So I'll just show you real quick and then we'll move on. If you can try to look for another question, it'd be good. This is a heavyweight craft stock, okay? If I spray refresher on it, and I'll just do this on half refresher, because it gets a little weird, I'll just spray it on half of that, okay? And I'm just gonna, this works on any kind of paper. It's pretty cool. So for watercolor, this could be really fun to do with refresher. But you wanna really work that into the paper. I'm just gonna tear that part off. And then I'm just gonna start kind of moving this around. Okay, and while I'm doing that, I'll answer questions. I received a stamp pad where the stamp pad is not attached. How can I glue it down? You don't glue it down, Cheryl, you contact Ranger. Just go to Ranger's website and contact their customer service. That's the easiest way to do that. You shouldn't have to fix that at home. All right, will new colors be introduced for spritz? There's no plans for new colors of spritz, but there's always an opportunity. I think that would be great. Sylvia asked, is there re-inkers for archival pads? Yes, there is. There's re-inkers for all the ink pads that Ranger manufactures. If you can't find them at your retailer, ask them about it, but then you can also just go to Ranger's website as well. What's the difference between oxides and distress oxides? I don't know if there's anything other than oxide. Distress oxide is oxide. Maybe I don't understand the question, but that's what I know. Oh, and see, Dee Dee just answered Cheryl. So there is an option if you want to glue. So this was the part that I actually added the refresher to, and it makes this paper pliable like leather versus if I were to do this dry, this stays kind of chunky. Refresher will always keep this paper pliable like leather. So the more refresher you add, if I add it to both sides, this would almost be like leather where you could glue down or sew it, so it could be really interesting when you're using it on a surface. All right, I see another question about frosted crystal, and that happens to be distress. So I knew this was going to be a little random. But see, I think in future ones, when we're focused on stuff, we can definitely take deeper dives onto properties and uses and technique. But the question was about frosted crystal, okay? This is frosted crystal. Frosted crystal is a translucent embossing powder. It's part of the distress line. It was, and I'm not sure, it might still be, but it's been a Ranger embossing powder for years, but I love it. And I use it for a lot of different things, even like to transform ephemera or photographs. And so for me, I thought it was really a great addition to the distress line. But understanding what it does, you have to be patient if you've never used it before. Give yourself that grace. Frosted crystal is a translucent powder that when it first melts, it becomes frosted, almost kind of texture-like, not gritty like sandpaper, just like almost a matte finish. But if you overheat it, it becomes shiny and it's no longer frosted. Typically, frosted crystal is used to create a frosted effect on a surface. So you can use it. I've done chalkboard techniques. I've done using it over printed paper or ephemera, but I'll just show you just on a piece of craft. And we can also just do it on a piece of white. That will help, or just on a tag. Okay, and you can do it. You can do this with a stamp. It works really great. Let's see if I have a stamp. I'm sure I do. Brought a lot of different things. Oh, there we go. Where is it? Okay, let's see. I brought out some classics. I wanted to do some other thing too. That's like, I agree. Frosted crystal is magic, Louisa. It is so cool. I love classics. So I'm just going to bring. Let's see. These are old school. What do I want to use? Let's do a word. That could be good. Nice pile of stuff. So what you're going to use as far as ink with frosted crystal, you can use embossing ink. So that could be any kind of embossing ink, distress embossing ink. You could use Versamark, really whatever you want. Or you could use an actual ink. So in this case, I'll use, where is that vintage photo that we just re-inked? There it is. I'll do that one too. I'll do that one on this and this on this. Okay. I'm going to place this down. I'm just using it just for effect. I'm not making anything pretty, so, you know, no judgment here. Just going to take embossing ink. Now, embossing ink, you can either use an ink pad if you want to apply it, or if you have a larger surface or a larger stamp, you can use an embossing dabber. If you use a dabber like this, remember, you're just supposed to lightly tap. You're not supposed to scrub, otherwise you'll tear off the fabric. But I often like a dabber because I can become a little bit more random. I'll show you what I mean when I stamp this. Let's just stamp it here. There we go. Stamp with purpose. So see how it's like skippity bits? I think that's going to be cool for just a technique. I don't think I have... Mario, could you hand me a piece of copy paper, please? Sure. Thank you. I'm going to take some frosted crystal and I'm just going to apply it. So remember, embossing powder is always going to go back in the jar. So just when you're applying it, don't shakety shake, just pour it on there, okay? Now, when I stamped it, I'm sure many of you thought like, oh, he didn't have any ink there. Well, embossing ink, this is a glycerin ink. There is always way more ink on a stamp than you imagine. But see how it's like skipped out here and there? That's really where the dabber came in. This is where I did the ink pad. You can always, if you wanted it more worn, you can wipe some of that off before you emboss it too. I know that probably freaks people out, but that's what you do. All right? Uh-oh. You all right? Yes. Okay. I didn't want to use chipboard. There we go. Okay. I'm just going to put this back in the jar. So there's often times where I'll use frosted crystal even over a whole sheet of paper, which is pretty cool. Okay. So here's the thing about frosted crystal. When you are embossing, you can use an embossing gun or a Ranger heated craft tool, either one. But I want to try to show you the stages if we can. Going to heat this up. Okay. Oh, we'll talk about it. I saw a question about an embossing dabber. I'll get there in a second. Okay. So when I start to emboss, you see the A and the R and the T. Do you see how that's a lighter white than the unembossed powder? Do you guys see that? That's when you know it's done. It literally just changes and off you go. So I think seeing it, that's why I wanted to do on craft, so you could see where it's, because it's harder to see when you're on white paper, that's for sure. Even if there's an ink color, it's harder to see. Okay, so this right here has been embossed. Now, over here where it's still pretty white, you could hit those areas a little bit. It doesn't take long. You can emboss it. See, it takes out the white. But this is really how frosted crystal embosses. So crystal, not in the sense of sparkly, glittery. It's just frost. Now, when you touch it, it does have a little bit of a texture, okay? Not sandpaper, but this texture has tooth where if you went over with pastels or chalk, it would actually grab onto the medium. It's very, very cool. The other thing is if I overheat this, so now we're just gonna pretend like we weren't paying attention and didn't listen to anything and you just wanted to keep overheating it, it starts to change. See how that art is now becoming a darker brown? That's where it's going from frosted to actually clear. It's because those frosted components are melting together, and now it's going to have more of a shine. Not the same as clear, but definitely shine, where this doesn't have any shine. So you could even see, I mean, visibly on craft, that's why it's most impactful. You wouldn't notice probably the color shift on white paper, but that to me is really important when you're using frosted crystal, that you just emboss it and off you go. My favorite use for frosted crystal is really over something. So I'll often take an embossing dabber and go over a piece of ephemera or a photo and use frosted crystal because it dulls it down. It's really cool. If you use an embossing dabber, embossing ink is glycerin. Glycerin, like really thick. Think of it like hand soap when you think glycerin, okay? It's not something fluid. So if you have your dabber stored like this on the shelf and you get up to use it and you think it's all going to be there, no way. It's like a jar of honey. You got to wait for all that stuff to ooze its way to the front before you use it. So if you're going to use a dabber, have it upside down. Oh, there you go. Put it on a flat surface, not on the speed bump. And you're good to go. Let's do a little bit with ink. Now, if I have embossing ink on my ink pad, do I clean it? Not if I'm going to use distress ink, but any other time you can just clean it off with water. That's fine. Okay, let's take a little bit of that and let's just turn the stamp and just use it a couple times. There we go. Just some rando collage. That's going to work. Frosted crystal. I keep seeing the question about the corners of the ink pad, and I did mention that if the corners of your ink pad are lifting up, if it's just cosmetic, you're good to go. If it's peeling away because you've had it forever, then you should replace the ink pad. But other than that, it's part of it. Just depends on if it's something you can live with or that you need to replace. So I hope that answers your question. I do see a question about microglaze. I'm going to talk about that. That's a magical elixir. Okay, so same thing. We got some frosted crystal on here. So I just did the word way. Can you see how it changed colors? So that's what you have to just pay attention to with frosted crystal. When it changes colors, it's embossed. Don't think to yourself, oh, but is it really? Should I go over it 12 more times? Yeah, if you want to change it to something shiny. But see, it doesn't take long at all to emboss. It's pretty great. And it looks still just like ink because see, it doesn't have any shine because it's frosted crystal. It's cool. And now I could ink over this. This could be a resist. So I could take another color of ink and take a blending tool and all that jazz.
You're using? Well, I know you know, but can you tell me?
Sure. That stamp set is a classic. It's
I'll post it.
okay. Let me just clean this off. So that's the other cool thing about frosted crystal is that when you apply it, it could actually work as a resist if I'm going to use some ink over the top of it. So let me just take, we'll just take a brush because it's got some texture, so I can just take an ink brush. I'm just looking to see what I have, using what I have out. Ooh, let's throw a little peeled paint at it. And I'm not doing the whole thing, just to show you. Just going to take a distress blending brush, slide this back. So see, it still stays brown. But it also has like a little lift to it. It's very cool. Like, you know, it's always hard when you're showing shine, matte, sparkle on a camera, right? For those of you that blog and try to photograph glitter or shimmer, it's hard. But that's what I love about frosted crystal. It's like embossing if you don't like the shine, okay? Another tip, if you ever don't like the shine of your embossing, is you can always put a little steel wool over it, over any embossing powder to dull it down. But that's what I love about frosted crystal. Okay, microglaze. We saw a question on distress microglaze. That's a tricky one. We could probably do an entire Asked and Answered on microglaze just because it's that cool of a product. But I didn't mean to trash that. I threw that right in the trash. Okay, distress microglaze. What this is a product that is designed to seal water-based mediums to make them waterproof. When we say waterproof, it doesn't necessarily mean put it outside and do mailbox decor. It just means that if it happens to get wet, the inks aren't going to be as fugitive, meaning they're not going to run or smear as quickly if you use distress microglaze. But if you saturate something and water gets under the surface and into the paper, you're done. But the cool thing about this is you can use it with distress ink. You can use it over distress oxide, but it does impact the oxidation of distress oxide. You can also use it over watercolor. So let's say you're not even using distress, you're doing a watercolor and you want to seal it. You want to make sure nothing happens to it, and you don't want to use a spray fixative because that's always a great option. Distress Micro-Glaze will allow you to do that. But we can do a lot of cool techniques with it. And I'm sure if you search Distress Micro-Glaze, you'll see just some great techniques. And like I said, maybe I'll do that as a demo day, because gosh, we can use it on glossy paper. There's so many crazy things, but let's just show you the basics. All right, the basics on this. Let's take one of my favorite stamps. You could tell it's a favorite. Look at that. Oh my gosh, the infamous Dragonfly Legend. Epic. Because I'm going to talk, right after this, I'm just going to talk about technique as well. Okay, so first off, note to self, don't keep the lid off of your Micro-Glaze. So what I was going to show you before I got distracted on stamps is Distress Micro-Glaze. It kind of has this consistency of like Carmex chapstick, kind of lip balmy stuff, not lotion and really not Vaseline. I would say really it's like a lip balm, okay? But it evaporates in the air. That's what makes it really unique as far as paper. It evaporates. So you don't want to leave the lid off because it will evaporate out of your jar. So I think that's really important. I see a lot of people showing other makers out there that have done a lot of cool things with Micro-Glaze. Is there a maximum temperature you can heat Micro-Glaze up? There is no maximum because the Micro-Glaze really will just dissipate with heat. So it's not ever going to blister. It's not even a wax. It's just something that evaporates in the air. So that was a good question. Okay, let's just use a color. Ooh, we'll do something. We'll do Uncharted Mariner. I'm just going to use Distress ink on a stamp. And this is also really important as well, is that when you're working with stuff, and let's do a piece of, well, I'll do watercolor paper. It doesn't really matter. It's really important that when you have these kind of questions, and even if you're coming here asking the question and getting it answered and you're like, okay, I understand it, that's great. But my advice to you is to definitely still try it. Try it yourself, because when you do it and you see it, it really makes a huge difference. Okay, here I just stamped on the smooth side of watercolor paper. The paper you use is completely irrelevant. I could do the same thing on a tag or heavy stock. The paper doesn't matter when it comes to what we want to do for Micro-Glaze. But once you stamp, if you are stamping with a water-based ink, that image needs to be dry before you seal it. Well, how do you know if it's dry? Ink dries pretty quickly, but if I know that I'm going to Micro-Glaze something ever, I always want to go in and just apply a little heat to it just to make sure. All right. Is Distress Custom Blend pads still available? Absolutely. The Distress DIY, both ink and oxide, those are available. That's where you can make your own custom blended ink pads. The difference, it's exactly the same pad in both of these. The difference is the black case for ink and the gray case for oxide, but the felt inside is exactly the same. Okay, so we've gone in and stamped and just applied a little heat. And you could have done all sorts of things. This could have been an inky background. This could be whatever you want it to be. But just its most simplified application. Let's take this and, gosh, which side do I want to do? I'll just do in the middle. How about that? Okay, I'm just going to take a little bit of Micro-Glaze and just using my finger, I'm just going to rub it onto the paper. So I just stuck a little on my finger. I didn't scoop it up like a shovel. I just put some right onto the paper. If you get too much, I felt I have a little too much because that was enough probably to do the whole image, because it does not take much. Kind of wipe some of it off. Once it's in the paper, meaning you've taken your finger and you've kind of rubbed that into the fibers of the paper, like I did, I would suggest if you were done with it, so let's say you were doing the final seal of your work, take a dry paper towel and just buff off any excess glaze, because the Micro-Glaze should not be visible, okay? As this dries, that sheen will go away. If I was using it as a technique because it makes a great resist, that would be something that maybe I wouldn't buff off right away, but it wouldn't hurt if you did, okay? Micro-Glaze does not hurt your skin, that I'm aware of, no. Okay, so what we're going to do next, we're done, it's sealed. So here's how we can test it just so you can see. If I take water, typically when I take water to distress ink, it's going to react right away. But if I put it over the whole thing, you can see now exactly where the microglaze is. It's like water beating on wax on a car or water on a window. So it is sealed that image, okay? We wouldn't typically do that, but maybe you would for an image. So maybe you had an image and maybe you're like, hey, you know what? I want my wings to really become watery, but I want the body and the words to stay detailed. You could do microglaze and put it in specific spots. So that's the thing about microglaze. It could be its own video. There's so many other things you can do with this product. So, you know, I like that there's a question and an interest. So that will just tell me that I want to do a demo video on this. Because you can use it as a technique, but its real purpose was just to apply it right over a surface for people that really felt the need to seal their work. You cannot use microglaze over crayons. Distress crayons, it will take it right off. You can use it over distress watercolor pencils if you want. You can use it over spray stain. And like I said, if you use it over Oxide, it will simply remove the oxidation, but it would in fact seal the ink. You kind of lose that kind of white, chalky, oxidized haze of that. So it's really cool. Could you stamp with it? I don't recommend stamping with microglaze because it's really a booger to clean out of your stamp. It just is, because it's waterproof. So when you put it on there, it kind of seals your stamp and makes your stamp, well, waterproof. So then when you go to ink your stamp next time, it just doesn't work. So that's not good. If you use it on spritz, Susan, it's going there again, anything that has a finish. So be that Oxide that has an oxidized finish or spritz that has a shiny finish, putting microglaze on it will impact the finish. So would it technically seal part of the spritz? Yes. But would it remove most of the shimmer or shine of the spritz? Yes. All right. So, oh my gosh, yeah, I see like technique, which brings me to this, because this is one of my favorite techniques done with microglaze. This is actually a distress microglaze technique where we've applied color, but see that microglaze, we were able to actually seal in some elements. This is another cool technique that I've done with microglaze. Let's see, let's find it. It's a whole little washed, there we go, right there, where you could stamp an image, watercolor an image, and then seal it with microglaze really rough, and then ink the background and get it all grungy. But see, like, then it's like, well, gosh, how did you mask off that area or just grunge the edges? Well, microglaze. So it's pretty cool to use it not only as a sealer, but also for a technique. So there's cool things, which brings me to the next thing. And then I'll continue to answer some questions. The things to remember when it comes to product, you'll never stop learning. You'll never know it all. And hopefully you never want to know it all. You want to keep experimenting and trying and playing. But my advice to you is, if you want to sit down and learn about product, get some stamps that you like. Pick a few. In this case, I was actually using the Dragonfly. You could just tell I gravitate towards serious favorites. These are like old school Stampers Anonymous. These are classics. This is Stampers Anonymous. Was actually a brand of anonymous artists before it, really became a brand that Royal Acme owns. But they're such cool art. I mean, look at that for Valentine's Day. That was a cool one with Cupid. But just really great artsy, funky stuff. And what makes it funky is because it's so many different artists that came together, and even on sometimes a similar set. It's really cool. But if you gathered stamps that you liked and you're like, okay, I'm going to sit down and just play with technique. I often find that if you do a technique, this was a class I used to teach. This was like a creative chemistry live, where we did everything with like from distress paint, doing resist, doing stencil monoprint, all of those things, but incorporating the same stamp. The reason I'm telling you that is because then when you create this, what you'll notice in this ring is the different effects of your background, not the different images you chose. And not that that's a bad thing, but I think if you really want to learn the technique, using the same images makes the technique used way more impactful, in my opinion. Like, for example, I'll just say these two tags, okay? Where it's like, all right, well, these are done exactly the same way, and these are both on watercolor paper, but like, what am I seeing? What's the difference? And the beauty of, having your step outs on the back is like, okay, this was Distress Oxide, so this is where we actually watercolored with Oxide to give a really cool kind of pastel effect, this was done with crayons, okay? So this was done like using Oxide as a top coat, and this was done using crayons as a base coat. Two completely different effects, still colored, but obviously this creates more vibrant wet look and this creates more of a hazy look. But by having the same stamp, I'm drawn to the effect. And so to me, that's just really a great way that you can create swatches of your own and just keep them on a ring. So when you want to sit down and play and create that effect. Now this was a live class. I did see a question about, is a class available? I'm going to talk about, oh, thanks Mario. I'm going to talk about creative chemistry because we're going way, way back. And I know people have asked for like a creative chemistry 4. Creative chemistry is an online class that I did with online card classes. It is still available. You have lifetime access. But at the time when we did it, it was actually a live class where we created content and we did live chats and it was all sorts of fun things. But creative chemistry was inspired by an education program that I used to do at Ranger, which was called Ranger University. And the concept was creating technique tags where it was just about the technique. Like if the technique had nothing to do with the stamp, you don't stamp it, okay? Because this was all about creating a technique tag. Everything is video instruction online. And then you have these printable step outs, okay? So what's cool about this, and these are old school ideologies, so if you're like, where do I get the binders? I don't think you ever can now because these were old ideology, but you can still do them like on a ring. But the idea was, for example, this was spritz and flick. So this was using just distress ink. So it's like ink tag with distress ink using blending tool, circular motion, and you'd see it in the video how it was done. Repeat with additional colors, mist with water, and dry. And what's nice about this is that it really is a great reminder. I still use my binders. I still use them because sometimes if I'm like wanting to do something different or to learn a new technique or be reminded of how something is done, like how did I do that effect? I forget. Everything is right there on the back. And that's a very cool reminder. And it teaches everything from alcohol ink. Now, some products have long been retired that were in this class that I may have used during the instruction, including maybe some certain embossing powders, but you could always find substitutions. So like this one, this was really good when we had distress markers. But just because we don't have distress markers, you probably have water-based markers. But now you can learn like, this is when you color on dry paper and watercolor. This is if you watercolor on wet paper. You can see the colors are much softer. This is if you do it on wet paper and then add a color to dry paper. And just right there is a great reminder. So I absolutely love, like that was crackle with stain. Ooh, putting stain under crackle to make it look like fused glass. So delicious, because this is where you're totally putting color in. And then there was techniques before products even existed. Like before spritz existed, we were kind of mimicking it with perfect pearls. So there's always different product. And now you could be like, oh, you know what? Let me try this technique with spritz. That's the cool thing about creative chemistry. And my advice, if you haven't taken creative chemistry, is to do them in order. Do 101, do 102, and do 103, because we build on to kind of the knowledge that you gain in this. It's really cool. You have lifetime access to the content. It is so cheap. In today's world of paying things.
You can't even go for lunch for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one was like $20 or $25 for 101. And then I think by the time we got to the end, it was like 35. But just, oh, like this one. Look at this. This is frosted crystal. See? It was a technique I just talked about. And here it is. So this is black cardstock, stamp image with embossing ink, immediately cover with frosted crystal, which we did. Remove the excess heat. Do not overheat. So see, even that reminder is there. Let it cool. Scribble with white school chalk and rub the chalk off with your fingers. And then the chalk is attached to the frosted crystal because I told you it has that frosty surface. That's it. Does it say, and then seal with blah, blah, blah? Nope, because you don't do that. You're just done. And it creates a faux chalkboard. How cool is that? So it's just great reminders if you want to create it. And you really can, yeah, don't lick your art. You can just go in and actually just use it and create it. So there we go. Good fun. Where are the locating the class? If you go to Tim Holtz, Mario put a link in the chat, but on timholtz.com, if you go to the blog, on the sidebar, there are links to each of these. And then once you do, you'll create an account with them. You'll be able to log in and you're good to go. It's a lot of fun because like I said, not only would you have these books, but even if you read that, you know, sometimes I've done a technique and I've read the instructions and I'm like, huh? You can go back and watch it. You go right to that segment. And then it even has makes of like how something was incorporated into a make. This is a cool one. Look at this. This is batik. So this is an embossing batik. So look at this. It's like a sheet of paper. It's completely smooth. But like then how is that wing so vibrant and crazy bright and it looks like encaustic? Well, there we go. We stamped. We applied clear embossing powder. We heat embossed it. We inked over the entire tag. So we used a color of distress ink. So in this case, we stamped in a color. Most likely barn door, could have been maybe a little picked raspberry thrown in there too. Then once the entire tag is inked with other colors, so that was the blue and the brown and all the other nonsense, this was a resist. Then we place a piece of cardstock over it. We iron it and done. We can create a batik. This is cool. It's a lot of fun. Here's a technique we did in Salvage Hearts. So if you watch the Valentine Live, remember this one where we did that faux enamel rust? Well, this was on paper, so we used Distress ink as our brown. And then we took the same technique, applied it to Salvage Hearts. And, well, similar, because we use collage medium and crayon, but you get the gist. It's very cool. All right, there we go. It is a trip down memory lane. It's super fun, Zoe, right? There's just, when you go back to these techniques, it's like, holy moly. How do you run out of ideas when you can just open a book and go, I'm going to make a card today and I'm going to use that technique? Okay, well, I need distress paint or this one. You know, I need distress paint and a tag and I'm going to create eroded metallic or I'm going to do a resist. It's a lot of fun. It's good fun. All right, how are we doing on questions, Mario? Watching the chat?
The questions that I have been seeing a lot.
Yes?
In general. How long does this product last? How long does that product last?
Okay, in general, product is not meant to be an everlasting gobstopper. That goes with any product. Product is meant to use. So there is no expiration date on product because there's too many factors when it comes to product. I'll switch cameras and really talk about that. There's too many factors when it comes to how long something should last because we don't know how you're storing it. Are you storing it in a cool environment or is it stored in an attic? Is it stored in something humid, something dry? What is the elevation that you live? All of those things impact product because, especially product like inks and paints, because it is a formulation. It is chemistry. You know, no one's going to ask how long is a stencil going to last. It's made out of plastic. That's it. But when it comes to mediums and stuff, it is meant to use. So you can't really say use by because it doesn't matter. Some people, like I've read where people have the original Distress inks from 20 years ago, have never re-inked them and still using them. Okay, maybe they're not using them as much, but however they're storing and wherever they live, like that's really good. The thing to remember, and that's where we started off with this Asked and Answered, is if you buy a product like an ink pad and it's not as wet as you want it to be, you have options. But before you re-ink or refresh, just make sure that your expectation is real. Like the amount of ink that comes off of an ink pad on a stamp is completely different than the color or intensity that ink would come off with a blending tool. So let me go back and talk about that and then, yeah, we'll keep going. So we talked about blending stuff. Let me get my other little zippy. I often keep like a zipper bag with just like extra foams and stuff because I never know what I'm going to want to talk about during the demo. But when it comes to blending, I know some people have dedicated blending foams for every color, and that's great if you do. You can use a regular blending foam, which was flat, or maybe you prefer the domed, because some people really are still like, I'm flat all the way. I love that that effect. I don't want to do domes. And then there's even the tiny ones. Now, how a color or how an ink goes on a surface is really, really important to understand. And the tools, everybody has different tools. I like foam and I like distress brushes. I know in the craft world, those cosmetic ink brushes are all everyone's jam. And if that's yours, just celebrate the heck out of it and love it. It's not my jam. It doesn't make it a bad product. It just means that I have a different preference for how I use stuff. So you have to use what you like. And that's the other important thing. If you're new or even if you're a seasoned maker, don't be influenced by somebody else just because they say it's the greatest thing. If it's not the greatest thing for you, you don't have to like it. That's okay. It doesn't make the product bad. It just means, you know what, it's not for me. So let's just talk about an ink. Let's do peeled paint. I saw that over here, and we'll even do the same with Oxide. Now, if you're working with any kind of blending tool with distress ink, you can actually double dip colors. That was the whole purpose of a blending tool, believe it or not. Back in the day, when we did our first blending, I was using a product Ranger had called Cut and Dry, which was a foam. And it was really about just taking a foam and blending colors. And I'll show you what I mean by that.
Real quick, which
Yes.
tin are you using for the mini blending tools?
Which container?
Yes.
Oh, this is the mini distress ink storage tin. So this is this one. And I've taken out the plastic insert because it has a little plastic insert in here. It's not attached. I just threw out the plastic insert. And then it allows me to have my tiny tools for pink, red, orange, yellow, green. And I have two shades, like a green and like a tealish. Blue, purple, gray, brown, dark brown. That's what I have in here. So I think I was what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. And then this is the packaging from the replacement foams. I just cut the little blister, put a little double stick tape in the back so I can store my foams. And that just works for me because I like the tiny tools for tiny things. I don't ever do a big background with a tiny tool because that's not what they're for. They're for like inking the edges of things or die cuts, and I absolutely love that. Judy said she used Cut and Dry a lot. Yeah, it was really, believe it or not, there was a time that we didn't have blending brushes in the world. Like people didn't even know what ink blending was prior to distress. And I'm not saying I invented it. I'm just saying we didn't really think to ink blend. Inks were really for stamping. But a blending tool, if you're working with a similar ink line, in the case of distress, you take your foam, you drag it across. If you just tap it, you're not going to get enough ink. You want to push down too, because remember, we need to get ink up on the surface. That's going to put ink on this foam. But the foam is designed really as like a transfer tool. So if I were to press down, I would get kind of a stamped image, but not the same as I would have with a rubber stamp. But blending was really about going in a circular motion and applying color to the edge. The dome foam just helps it eliminate like hard edges, but really this is meant to blend color. So if I wanted to create kind of a teal color, I could take a color and go and double dip, which I know freaks people out beyond belief because they're like, well, I'm going to contaminate my inks. But you're not with a blending tool, because you can see the ink is trapped onto the foam. It's not actually transferring ink to an ink pad. That's how a lot of people blended color back in the day, because if you didn't have a big range of color and you say, oh, okay, I want to go back to a little bit more Uncharted Mariner and make this a little bit bluer, it was nice that you had that flexibility. Now, if regardless of what I say to you freaks you out, if you're like, absolutely not, this freaks my freak, but I like the idea of it, well, another option then, especially if you have a glass mat or craft sheet of any kind, is take the ink that you're using, press down, because remember, we want to get ink out. Remember, if we just push, you're not going to get any ink. You have to actually press down, not just tap it. That's not enough ink. Put an ink down, put the other color of ink. I wanted to do that just to still shock you. And then you could take your blending tool and go, okay, well, I'll blend this way. I'll keep that ink from my glass. And this way I'm blending, peace of mind, I didn't double dip. Like I said, there's no right or wrong. But what you cannot do is take Oxide and ink together, because these are different inks, different properties. If you were to double dip this, you would contaminate your distress ink. So if you took Oxide and went into your ink pad, you would contaminate this. However, if you went with ink and then your Oxide, you would not. But once Oxide is on the foam, you don't want to go back into an ink pad. This could be a great solution. Okay, case in point, let's say we wanted to, I'll clean this off, just a little bit of water. We'll wipe this off. See how much ink is there when you push from an ink pad? My word. Okay, let's say you had a color like saltwater taffy. And I picked raspberry. Okay, let's say you have an Oxide, but you want it to be a little different shade. Okay, and you're like, but I don't have another color of Oxide, but I do have a color in distress ink. Okay, cool. Let's mix those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my foam. Now these foams are washable and reusable. So typically if they get trashed or start to shred apart, then, well, it's done. You need to just throw it away. But you could put it in water. I've got a little container of water over here, and I'm just pushing it in and squeezing it out. you could clean the foam. So you could wash and dry these foams, let them air dry, and reuse them again and again if you want to. Okay, until I pretty much say just use the foam until it starts to fall apart and leaves little, foam nuggets, then you're done. But that's why I like to have just a bag of foam, because I can go from color to color. Okay, so let's say we want to do this. We're like, okay, we know Oxide, especially when it comes to saltwater taffy, is going to be light pink. This is going to be a bright pink, but I really want to use both. So if I just go in with saltwater taffy, really pretty color, oxides are always going to blend softer than distress ink. So this is where people will take an ink pad, they'll take their tool and they'll do this. My ink pad's dry. Look, there's nothing there. It's dry. Well, no, it's not dry. It's the fact that, it might be dry if you've used it, but if it's a new pad, it's really just how you're using it. You really need to make sure that you're pushing down to get enough ink on here. And if you want concentration of color, you need to concentrate on that area to provide color. If you just want to do a light coat, you go light, but you're only going to get the lightest application of that color. It's still there, but it doesn't mean that the ink pad is dry, okay? But if you want to mix a color, we're going to take saltwater taffy oxide and we're going to take picked raspberry distress ink, and we're still going to get that creamy, dreamy oxide, but we're going to add a little punch of color with picked raspberry. And this is going to give us, it's still going to give us all that oxidized effect because the pigment in oxide will always dominate. And this gets me pretty close to like worn lipstick. So that's another cool thing to work on, is combining colors. And even if you said, oh, you know what, I still want this to be a little hotter. Okay, I'll just go around the edge with that. Oh, you know what, I want to soften this with a little salt water. Okay, I can go in. That's the beauty of blending. Remember, blending is designed to give you the control, and the bigger the circle, the more you'll be able to pull that color in, but just start in small circles. The tool is designed to do the work, and you can get a beautiful, beautiful blend, a beautiful background, but you can also add those shadows and highlights, just remembering that ink is going to be the most intense color-wise. This is going to give you that softer effect of color, right? That's the beauty. Does washing a foam that was an oxide make it safe? Yeah, once you wash it, these are water-based, everything comes out of it. There's nothing left to it. All right, so far so good. I like these questions. I hope you find it beneficial to you. So Oxide, another thing, while I'm waiting for questions or if Mario sees anything, feel free to interrupt. The other thing to know about ink, especially like if we're talking about Oxide, is if you apply Oxide to a surface, that's saltwater taffy. I'll do something probably do a little cracked pistachio as well. Why not? If you use it to stamp or blend, you're good to go, okay? It's going to dry that way. It's going to dry as a color. Oxides are designed to oxidize when they get wet, okay? So if we were to wet this, it's not only going to start wicking the color, because that's what it's going to do, it's also going to oxidize as it dries, okay? Why do you always use tags? Well, I don't always use tags. This was watercolor paper. The thing before, this was craft paper. So, yeah, I mean...
Because you're the mayor of Tag Town.
Well, no, not really. These happen to just be distress mixed media heavy stock. I just like creating a tag. I think tags are incredibly useful. And they have a hole in it already if I want to put it on a ring, or I can cut it off if I want to put it on a card. But I don't always use tags. I like that surface. This paper also comes not in tag form, in, A2 if you want. So, all right. So when you're looking at this, you can see that cracked pistachio started to see those little white areas, starts to oxidize. Oxide, the more water you add to oxide, the more it will continue to oxidize. So if you like the color, you never have to worry about it turning white because it won't oxidize unless it gets wet. That's the thing to remember. But every time you add it, it's going to create a cool effect. So now we're going to dry this. You don't have to dry. I see all the mayor of Tag Town. You don't have to dry it. Well, I like working on tags because I know this surface. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I did cards for the last 2 weeks. Those were all cards. One of them was a tag. So yeah, check out Instagram. There's a lot of cool stuff. Okay. There's another another layer. So see, the more water we get, the more it oxidizes. Now, in a comparison of just a background tag, here is an inked tag, and here's an oxide tag. So see how oxides just give it that kind of that chalky finish? I absolutely love that. It's really, really cool. I think it's just good fun, okay? All right. What do we got? What are the questions we have? I'm just trying, the chat goes really, really fast. All right, do I see anything? I just see everyone chatting with each other. That's good, okay. I just don't wanna like do my own thing and ignore because that defeats the whole purpose. Does the kind of paper you use change the effective ink? Great question, Susie. 100% it does. So let's just talk about some different papers. This is going to be watercolor. This is craft. This is, let's take a little mixed media. So this is the same paper, not in tag form, that you can use. I used to use manila tags just from the office store, but those actually have too much yellow in there for me. Black, we're going to use black. This is a white, smooth, heavy stock, and let's see, what do I have here? That's specialty. I think I can even do glossy. It's a great question, because honestly, I'm glad you brought that up, because honestly, that's probably the most important thing. I see a question about resist spray, Mario, so if you can help me remember that, that's good. So this one's glossy cardstock. Okay, so all of these papers, so these are all distress papers from the brand, but it doesn't mean you have to use this from the brand. If you find a paper that you like, use it, really. I don't think there's any super important best paper in the world, because it depends on what you want to do, what product you're using it on. Do you want to die cut? Do you want to stamp? Do you want to write on it? I mean, all those different things. That's why there's so many different types. Distress watercolor has a texture on one side, smooth on the other. This is watercolor paper. Distress heavy stocks, these are all heavyweight cardstock, so heavier than your typical 100-pound. These go up to 130-pound. This is super smooth white. This is craft. So this is going to be much thicker than like a grocery bag or just craft paper. The mixed media, you can see, has a little bit of a cream compared to the white heavy stock, and then this is black, okay? And then glossy is a clay-coated paper that has a shine on one side and it's matte on the other. Mostly used for alcohol ink, but you can use it for different things. So let's just take an ink and just apply those different inks to a surface. Okay, I'm gonna take Salvage Patina in Distress ink, and let's see if I have Salvage Patina in an Oxide. Wouldn't that be great if I did? I probably don't, but I don't. I have peacock. Oh, I have peacock feathers in both. Let's do that. Just so you can see both products in both surfaces. Now, keep in mind that when I'm talking about ink and oxide, the same rules would apply if we were doing spray stain and oxide sprays, okay? Because we have sprays in both ink, I'm trying to get this out of the tin, ink and oxide formulation. What the sprays really are just a sprayable version of an ink, but you cannot re-ink an ink pad with a spray. It doesn't have the same resins in there to live on an ink pad. It's meant to be dispersed through a spray. But spray stain and oxide spray will give you the same effects these ink pads do, but in a sprayable form for large mixed media areas. But different papers, so we're just gonna start with ink, and we're gonna do just a quick swipe test and then we'll move on. Just going to apply, that's watercolor, that's smooth, that's watercolor texture, that's going to be mixed media, that's going to be black, that's going to be white heavy stock, that's going to be craft, and that's going to be glossy. Okay, now right away we can see how this ink, so I use the same ink pad, but you can see how that ink transferred between papers. So do you see what I mean? Going back to the beginning of like my ink pad is dry. Well, you would never think that ink pad's dry because it even has like a flood. It just depends on the surface that you're using it on and how much that paper wants to absorb the ink pad in that instance. Glossy is going to be the most absorbent. So it's just essentially sucking all the ink out of it and it's much smoother. These all are paper. I mean, they have a different texture. So direct to paper, you can see they swipe on there pretty much the same, but their water reactive properties are going to be very different. So now we're talking about ink. So water reactive meaning when we spray it with water, what does the Distress ink do? Okay, so this is mixed media. So you can see a little bit of water here, gets that ink to start moving right away. It's meant for wet applications. That's the whole point of mixed media, which again is the same paper that these tags are made out of. It's meant for mixed media. It's also the same paper in Dilutions Journal. This is watercolor. Okay, watercolor you see moves the freest, the quickest, because watercolor paper is designed to always let go of a water-based ink. That's why it's beautiful for painting. So here, the mixed media, while you can move the ink, see it gets that saturation, this just really allows that ink to become fluid almost instantly. On the textured side is going to hold it a little bit more because it's got little pits, little peaks and valleys, and when your color is in there, you can still get it out. So the longer the water sits over that, it'll start dissolving those little pits. But that's why sometimes when people do watercolor, they love how the color builds up in those little wells and it creates more depth. So you could use either side of this particular paper. This is exactly the same on both sides. Black, well, a dye ink can't show up on black paper because it's translucent. So the ink is there. You can see that it's wet. It would still move, but you wouldn't never see any color because it's translucent. Craft is typically the most porous, and that's why I wanted to do craft heavy stock. I wanted something that would still hold the color so you could see that it doesn't blend out like these other ones, but it does blend out some because it's a thicker weight craft, which I think is important. White, now white heavy stock, it does work with water, but this paper, because of its smooth finish, tends to get a little lumpity bumpity when it gets wet. It kind of creates this little chicken skin that we learned over time that when we apply color, I think it was Jen Shirkers that pointed out, when you apply a lot of water to this smooth paper, the water impacts the smooth finish and it could dry with a little bump. So if it doesn't bother you, that's one thing, but just keep in mind that this isn't typically meant for wet. So if you wanted a white paper for wet techniques, I would stick with watercolor paper. And then we have glossy, and glossy is the one that went on really shiny, really wet. And this is the paper that everyone thinks like, ooh, don't put distress on glossy paper because it's going to run everywhere, right? It's actually the most permanent of all the papers. It doesn't mean that this is now waterproof. You can see a little bit of ink runoff, but this ink is not fugitive at all on glossy because glossy is clay-based. So that ink really absorbed under that gloss finish almost instantly. So quite honestly, you could use distress ink or oxide on glossy paper, and if you never plan on wetting it, you don't have to worry about it, but it's never going to smear. And a lot of times people think that they always need a permanent ink for glossy paper, but you don't, okay? So now we'll just do the same run through real quick with oxide, just so you can see the difference there. So oxide. Oxides are often wetter than ink because oxide is a fusion of dye and pigment. So it's got some dye in it, but also a pigment that is what creates the oxidation. But you can see it goes on almost like a paint. It does go on really fluid. Okay, we'll go on black. Look at that. You can see that. And we'll go on glossy. That's getting a little wet. So that was distress oxide. Okay, so right away you can see that when oxide goes on the paper, it's much more intense than the ink because remember, it's a dye and a pigment. So as true to color, as true to match as we can, it is, but it's a completely different ink or it's a completely different property, so it can't match exactly because it doesn't have the same components to it, all right? So let's see, where do we start? We'll do mixed media. So oxide, it's still going to wet, it's still going to create a mixed media effect. On watercolor, same thing. It's everything that we would expect this to do, but you can see this has more opacity, almost like a fluid paint. But remember, when this dries, it's also going to give you that slight white oxidized finish by design. There it is on that white heavy stock. So see, it moves a little bit, but it's not really meant for that. If you want a white paper, watercolor is going to give it up more. Craft, look at how the oxide is much more prominent on darker papers. You'll see the same happens on black. See how like much more luminous that water is than it is here because the dark surface is really showing the white that's in oxide. Same on black. See, it's almost like it's just cool. So you can use oxide on darker papers and you really get some great effects. And then of course on glossy, you're going to get the same thing. It's just the dye has soaked into the paper, but the pigment is what sits on top. So this one has more separation than just the dye, because the dye of this is already soaked in. So there you go. So paper, just using the same products on different papers, you can see you get different results. And so my advice, when would I use specialty stamping? I love specialty stamping paper, but it has been retired. It is discontinued. I would use specialty stamping if I'm stamping detail or if I'm doing any type of coloring with markers. That's when I use specialty stamping. So I didn't include that in the mix. It's going to be pretty similar to kind of a cross between glossy, because it's coated but it's matte, and a matte cardstock. But yeah, my advice really is get some papers, even like this demo right here. Get whatever papers you buy and you use, and do something this simple with whatever products, and just write with a pen. You know, Oxide, mixed media, ink, mixed media. It's a great reference when it comes to kind of creating. All right, question, does the mixed media heavy stock come in the 100 sheet pack? It does not yet. Ranger sells bulk paper. If you go to their website, they sell paper in like 100 packs because typically when it's sold in the open market, it's like 10 pieces, 5 pieces, just depends on what it is. And so they do bulk, so you can get like 100 sheets of distressed watercolor cardstock in bulk, and you save money that way. I think they were working on getting mixed media in, but mixed media comes, we get papers from all over the world, from Germany, from Italy, from China as well. And I think that they have to order that, so I'll follow up. That's a great question.
And you wanted to talk about resist, I think?
Yeah, someone asked about resist spray, and then yeah, if you have any other questions, keep it going. Let me grab my resist spray. That is in the bag. So resist spray is, if you think about it in the simplest way, distress resist spray is like glossy accents in a bottle, okay? That's what you have to think about. So if you know what glossy accents is that fluid stuff that you put over things and it dries dimensional and it dries super shiny, super glossy. That is what resist spray is. And because of that property, it creates a great resist. We can use it over things. Now, I'll just show you the basics of it, but if you want to learn more about resist, there's a video, several videos that I've done, techniques on using resist spray, because you can use them through stencils, you can use them with brayering ink over the top of it. You can use it to adhere glitter. It's also a really great glue if you're going to sprinkle glitter on something really quick. But there are drawbacks to this. The first thing to note is that wherever this sprays, it wants to stick. So if you work on a glass mat, if you don't have something covering this, the resist spray will dry on the glass and you'll have to scrape it off with a razor blade. It won't damage anything, but it's not going to wipe off with water because it's meant to be a resist. Resist means it's going to resist water-based things, including cleaners. So you would have to scrape it. So when I use resist spray, I'll either work in a splat box, or I'll work with a paper towel, or all sorts of things. So the other thing to keep in mind is this little sprayer. Now the sprayer, when you're done with it, I'll show you how I clean it. But if you don't clean the sprayer, you're just going to be buying replacement sprayers. And honestly, I don't see what the problem is with that. I always have replacement sprayers. It's no different than having replacements for anything else that you have, be that coffee filters or anything else. I mean, you need replacements for things sometimes. So spritz replacements, I always have that, because if a distress spritz clogs, I want a spritz replacement. And then a sprayer. Now the spray stain sprayer, and I don't know if they still call them spray stain sprayers or just sprayers. They are different than the spritz. It's a different tube than the spritz. So could you use one with the other? It just has a different tube length. That's the only difference. The sprayer is slightly more open on a spritz. So I guess if you were in a pinch, you could, but these are for spray stain, oxide spray, and resist, okay? But as far as the neck and the collar, they would fit interchangeably on the bottles. But spritz ones just have a different tube meant for the bottle of spritz. Okay, so resist spray, when you go to use it, it is a resist. So if I'm just going to put it on watercolor paper, I'm going to get this going because I know that my sprayer is clean. And I'm just going to give it like a spritz, okay? So the spritz, you can see it comes out pretty thick. You see that like pattern? So it's not misty airbrush, it's pretty intense. If you put it directly on an area, let's go with a darker piece of cardstock so you can see it. I'll move this off to the side. Okay. It comes out in a purpley hue by design, because if you put this over an inked background, you would see this purple cast. We did this because I wanted it kind of slightly tinted so you can see where you put it, but it will dry clear. So don't freak out when you see this like lilac color, like, oh my gosh, what's going on with the bottle? It dries clear, but we wanted it slightly tinted when you first apply it when it's wet. I don't know how they do it in chemistry, but I'm happy they did it. And then this way you're like, oh, okay, I put it there and you could be done. This was like 3 sprays. So you can see how thick and textured, that's exactly how it's going to dry. Whereas here, even with 1 spray, it has little tiny goosebumps on there. See that? It's also how it's going to dry. Now, if you're like, well, what if I don't want that little speckly look? What if I want to, could I brush it on? Sure. Unscrew it, put in a paintbrush, brush it on. Could I brayer it on? Sure. But whatever tool you use to apply it, you need to clean it while it's wet. Meaning you need to clean the resist spray off your brayer while it's wet, off your brush while it's wet, because once it dries, you would need to go and clean it with like hand sanitizer or alcohol to break down the properties. Let's see if I've got something. I've got some other inky things. So let's just say, because I always keep just ink backgrounds. These happen to be spritz ones. But let's do a bright color. We'll do this one. That bright green is good. Okay. And let's take a stencil. I got stuff everywhere. I never know where this is going to go. And that's why I said, like, the whole asked and answered, if we were focused on one thing, we could take definitely deeper dives into what you're looking for. But let's say I want to do something that's not already circular. Oh, there's diamonds. Oh, there's this. That's nice. There's this. Oh, I love stencils. This is one ring of many. Oh, that's a good one. Let's do this one. It's like a doily. Okay. I got my stencils flipped around. Let me just unscrew the ring. This is a mini, but you could do the same with really whatever size stencil you want. But this is a small piece of paper, so you only need a small stencil. Okay. Let's say we want to resist this. Well, now I don't want green. Now I'm going to want something. Never have too much of that. Okay, we're going to do a little pink because it's kind of doily. We're going to do that. All right. So I place that over the top. You guys see that? It's just sitting there. Could you tape it down? Could you do all that? You could do all of those things. It doesn't matter. But you do want your stencil to kind of sit down. So I'm going to place this down. It is going to spray my hand, but I'll wash my hand right away. Okay? So I'm going to take this and just spray just through the stencil. Okay? Just a little spritz. So that means when it's on my stencil, what do I need to do? I need to clean it when it's wet. How do I do that? I put it in water right away. I have a little, I'll hold this off to the side. I have a little tray of water right here, and I just throw the stencil in there and it's clean. That's it. So that's exactly what I would do with a brayer or a brush. Just throw it in water. I just took a little water, put it on my hand, and the resist spray is off my hands. So that was through a stencil. Now cleaning this. When you're done with this, you are going to want to take this off. So you're going to unscrew this. Let me grab my towel. There we go. Unscrew the sprayer. You're going to want to take it into, if you don't want to use the sink because you're concerned about your plumbing or whatever, that's fine. Take it outside, put it in a container of water and spray water through it. So I'll just show you in this little tray if you were going to do this outside. You put the whole thing in water and you're just going to spray it, and you're going to see all of that resist come out. Now, when I do this at home and I take this out of the bottle, I'll actually spray whatever's left in here on a project because there is resist spray in here, and if I don't want to waste it, you could see, that's what I would do until it doesn't spray anymore. And then all you're going to do is just spray it in the water until it's clear. See how like it's pretty much just clear stuff coming out now? It's just water. That's it. Then I'm just going to give it another spray just to make sure that the tube is empty, put it back on. And then I learned this trick from Dina Wakely. That little bit of moisture, that water that's on there, I don't dry it off. I put the cap on and it just kind of keeps a little moisture inside there so that little tip doesn't go in and clog. So that's it. I do that every single time, Catherine. Every time I'm done with resist spray, because if it does clog, then you need a new sprayer. There's no cleaning it out. So when you're done using it, so I just do it when I'm done using it like I did here, but if you weren't going to use it for say like 15 minutes or half an hour, you would need to clean it. So I try to get all my resist spray stuff done and off we go. Okay, so let's talk about these real quick. It air dries. You can see it's not as purple as it was before, but resist spray can also dry with heat. So if you want to use a hair dryer or a heat tool because you're in a hurry to dry it, you can dry with a heat tool. It's not going to change anything. But does it have to be dried with a heat tool? It does not. The trick is, how do I know if it's dry? If you touch it and it's not wet, it's dry. On this one, that's really all you can tell. Or if you see that it's still purple, it's definitely wet. Okay, let's just dry this. I'll start drying it a little bit and then I'll come back to it because that should be dry completely when we're done. Okay, will that affect the stencil that he has in water since he has resist in the water now? No, because the concentration of water to resist is nothing. When I take the stencil out, I still rinse it off with water. That's just, the stuff in this sludge, it'd be like taking a bath if you're covered in mud. You wouldn't get in the bathtub and then just get out and consider yourself clean. You would rinse off the mud and probably drain the tub and take a shower, right? So it's kind of the same idea. This is just getting off the resist before it dries, and then I would take all of the tools out and rinse it with clean water. Yeah, that's just it just essentially keeps the stuff from drying. But that's a great question. You want to do a final rinse. Okay, so these, what could we do with it? Well, we could do a lot of things. We could do some ink blending. I happen to have a little bit of ink here off to the side, and we'll do some sprays as well. But I could take a little bit of ink, and if I ink blend over where I sprayed, it resists. See that little white? That's nice. If I use an ink spray, so let's do a little spray on here. Okay. I used resist spray and distress glitter. Didn't stay on the watercolor paper. What am I doing wrong? My guess is that you didn't apply enough resist spray and the glitter wasn't applied as quickly. Now keep in mind, resist spray for glitter is just for a very light coat of glitter. If you want a heavy amount of glitter to stick, you would want to use a heavier glue like Collage Medium or Glossy Accents. But resist spray, you technically have to put it down to where it's like purple, shake it on, and you're just going to let the finest dust of glitter show. But if it's handled a lot, like if people are rubbing it with their fingers, then you would want a thicker glue that's going to kind of catch the glitter a little bit better. But that's all I can think. So if I take a spray, here it happens to be Scorched Timber, I could spray directly on, or I'll just spray a little bit on the glass. So I'll use Scorched Timber. We'll even throw in a little Antique Linen. Okay, this is just spray stain. So I could use a blending tool, or if I was spraying it or just wiping this through. So just wanted to get some dark color on there and say move this around. It resists immediately, so that's still resist spray. Now when this dries, I'll show you that. I'll even dry this with a heat tool. Because see, doing messy things like this is how you learn about the product. And I think that's what is so important as makers, is to understand that you have to give yourself this playtime with product. It doesn't mean you can't make cards and all that stuff, but if you always sit down with the objective of that, you're too intimidated to answer the question, what if, because you don't want to ruin the card or whatever it is you're making. So sometimes you just need to get paper and product and get a little messy and kind of go from there. All right, get some water on there, clean this up. All right, so here it's done some resist, but because I've sprayed it, see, blending gave me a really clean resist, so to speak. But when you spray it, see how much ink is sitting on there, and I dried it? You could leave it like that. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you go over it with a damp cloth, you'll be able to reveal more of the color. And I'll show you what I mean. So see, I just took off that ink that's sitting on the top, and now you have all of that resist over the top of it. So the question is, like, can you resist with a spray ink or an ink pad? Yes and yes. Which is better? It's whatever you prefer, quite honestly. I think like on something like this where we had the stencil, I'm going to prefer to use an ink blending tool or a blending brush, because a blending brush is going to give me even more control over a color. So let's take that. Ooh, we got a lot of stuff, Mario.
You do.
Holy moly. I knew this one was going to be a little chaotic, and I'm loving it. Because if you guys like this format, I think it's really going to be good to be able to show up and learn about a specific product that you would see listed as a topic. Because all the future Asked and Answered will always have a topic of what we're going to be doing in that one. So you know if it's something that interests you or not. So, all right, I'm just going to ink. So I'm just using a blending brush. Again, I just like this because it's just my preference for inking. So the darker we go, the more that doily is showing up. Because see, the resist spray has covered that. So over here where it's light, you see how that fades out? I love that. So that's why I don't like ink over the whole thing or brayer it, just because my preference is I want this to fade in and out. But you do you. If you wanted something to be like a perfect background, you could ink the entire thing perfectly, okay? The thing to know about resist spray, it's in the name. Resist. So the ink is resisted. It doesn't mean it disappeared. So what you're going to want to do anytime you ink over resist spray is go in with that damp paper towel, just slightly damp, not a baby wipe. That's just too wet. And you're just going to wipe over it. See the difference? See right away, like that's where I wiped off. Watch how that changes. See the difference? All that ink is sitting on that resist spray. So if you don't wipe it off and you think, oh, would it ever dry like that? No, it won't. Not blended ink. Spray stain did because we dried it with a heat tool. But this, you need to wipe off that layer and then you have that wonderful batik effect that still fades in and out. Quite cool, isn't it? It's neat. And see, it has a bit of a shine. This is over a spritz background, by the way. This is one of my spritz samples where you can see that's the background. It all looked the same, but there's also a layer of spritz. So you can resist over spritz as well and still get that shine. That half has been spritzed, that half is not. So cool, right? Fun. So last one we'll just show like just maybe with some Oxide. I'll put a little Oxide down, a little bit of water, and we'll just drag this through just so you can see. There's probably not a lot of water on there. There we go. Da, da, da. So even on craft or anything else, same rules apply. So you can use Oxide, you can use ink, you can use spray. It will resist. If you try to resist with paint, paint is going to be much thicker and it's very hard to resist. Use resist spray with paint. You would have to put it on top of paint and then still ink through it. So hope that helped. There's so many things you can do with every product you're asking about, but I love that I'm at least trying to hit the high notes if you can, right? The question, if you can't refresh archival pads, can you re-ink them? Yes, you can re-ink every ink pad you have. That is what you want to do. Archival is oil-based, so that's why it can't dry out. If an archival pad is not working, it needs ink. So unlike a water-based ink that is impacted by climate and heat and temperature where it can dry, archival doesn't really happen. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Thanks, Zoe. Good. All right, good deal. How am I doing on questions, Mario?
Good.
Doing good?
Yeah, you keep up.
Hey, I'm trying to answer those questions. It's really good. I think that, knowing like what you guys are interested in seeing definitely helps going a little bit different. I didn't see Tim was going live today. Follow me on Instagram. You would have seen it yesterday. So Instagram is the first place that I'll always post if I'm going live the day before. And it also allows you to click a little reminder. So I don't know how many of you guys use that feature on Instagram, but I've been doing it. It's super helpful where there's a reminder. And thank you for those that share the reminder. I appreciate that. But if you touch remind me, it will actually send you a notification when we go live. So this way, if you do forget from yesterday to today, then you're good. I love that. How do I create snow on colored paper? I want it to be white. I would use white paint. That would be the best. That's really good. Does resist spray work well over collage medium? Absolutely it does. So if you wanted that shine over collage medium, not quite sure where you're going with that thought process, but it would. So if you had something collaged and then you did resist and then you did ink over it, could you? Yes. So that's good. Oh, thanks, Carla. I do like that. I think really that Instagram notification is super nice because, well, I'll be honest, Mario sets it as well.
Yeah,
like a reminder.
Uh-huh.
That's what we do.
I like it.
So, yeah.
It has never not worked. It's always worked for me.
Yeah, because I mean, as great. I see a question on paint, so I'm going to jump into paint now. As much as you can do the notification, click the bell on YouTube. I've heard from people like that. That's really, it's kind of finicky. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But really on Instagram, that when you see that little count, it just says remind me. Just touch it, and then it kind of goes into your phone. So it's good. There you go. Absolutely, Debbie. Welcome. Okay, so we're going to use some distress paint. I saw somebody ask about just a quick technique. It just gives me a chance to talk about these paints a little bit. I always like to do this. For the first technique, I like to just show how cool. But I will tell you, distress paints are a very fun medium in the distress world, but very different in the paint world. So it is really important to understand that when you're using distress paint, you really can't have, I think, this expectation of it being like craft paint. It does paint like craft paint, but it does other things. And every single medium in the world, so I know I'm focusing on distress product because, well, distress is my line, so I'm more familiar with it. But it doesn't make distress the best product out there by any means, in any type of medium.
Hey.
No, it doesn't. Distress ink pads are meant for what they were designed to do, but they can do a lot of other things. They're not just for dragging on the edges of paper. So I like sharing that. But if you have a certain paint or a certain spray or a certain ink or a certain paper that you like, you need to use it because that's what you like to use. But if you limit yourself because you don't want to play around, you'll never truly understand like how beautiful these are, okay? So distress paints are a fluid acrylic paint. They actually have a mixing ball in here. I don't know if you can hear it when I shake it up. It is a fluid paint. Long ago, these came in dabber tops, okay? And you can still get replacement dabber tops if you wanted to turn these into dabbers. I just didn't like that simply because they dried out a little bit. But the big difference between distress paint and other paints is that it reacts with water in the sense that it's actually going to marbleize when we get it wet. So instead of adding a medium, it doesn't create cells. I don't want you to confuse it with paint pouring, but it will actually start to marbleize a little different. It's also the only medium in the distress line, as far as, you know, inks and colorants, that is permanent when it dries. So distress paint is reactive with water while it's wet, but permanent when it's dry. So just a basic, we'll go into a tag. If I wanted to paint with it, you're simply going to just, there's a little, see a little indent. You flip up the flip top. It has a plug in here. So the flip top is designed to plug that up to keep these airtight. That's really important. But the other thing I really wanted on these flip tops was a spout. Typical craft paints don't have the spout. They're kind of flat. And I find that it gets even more paint around the edge than there is. So I like that. It also allows me to control how much paint goes onto a surface. So in this case, I don't normally work on glass for this, so I'm not going to. I brought out a craft mat.
This?
Where did I put it? No, that's a piece of paper. Oh, there it is.
Oh, here.
It's right on the table. Thanks. So it's just going to help me. I want paint to move a little bit more. You could use it on glass, but I really like that it moves more on a craft mat. So because I'm working on the white glass mat, I'm just going to use this mat instead. This is silicone backed, also from Tonic, but it has these great weighted corners. So it clings to your glass. You don't have to do anything, but now these are weighted, so it won't move either. So, okay, back to it. I'm just going to be able to actually squeeze some paint. Holy smokes, that was a lot of paint. I literally need like a drip. There we go. That's the control we like. Every single time I pick up the paint, I just do a drip. That's it. Okay, so the viscosity of the paints also vary by color. So depending on the intensity of the color, how much pigment is in that, you might find, like for example, Mermaid Lagoon is a little thicker viscosity than mustard seed, okay? Because we needed more pigments to make this color than we did for just yellow in here or pink. But they're all very, very fluid. And what I mean by fluid is like, it still has a little bit of texture, but it will never hold texture. It doesn't have any body. If you try to paint, it won't create peaks. If you paint it, I'm just going to use my finger. It paints out beautifully. You can also use it with a blending tool. So a lot of times you'll see people want to apply paint maybe through a stencil. If you were doing that, I would suggest, I'm going to take off this domed foam. I would suggest that good old standby flat foam. Does that mean you can't use the domed foam? No, of course you can use domed foam. You can even use the tiny foam. But you can also just take, put it on the right way, take flat. So if I wanted to say blend paint, and this is on paper, but I could do this on wood, I can do this on canvas, I can do this on whatever, because distress paint is also permanent on metal, plastic. You could use it on glass, but it will scratch off. But you could use it on your on any type of acetate. You can use it on any kind of like your ideology embellishments, from resin, where you've seen us paint with it, to metals. It creates some great patina effects, but also on paper. And right now I'm just talking about viscosity, and then I'll show the technique of it. Okay, so even if I wanted to blend, I could totally blend with this. The other thing about this paint versus traditional acrylic paint, this has no filler in it at all. So this paint will never become crunchy. It will never get hard. So you could leave it in this foam, and you could save your paint foams in a bag and go back and use this paint from this pink foam, like not the paint itself, but the foam, a month later. You don't have to worry about washing them out, but you could. You could wash it out only while the paint is wet. Once the paint dries on here, it just stains it permanently, okay? So that's really like the basic. The paint dries really quick when you blend it. It stays a little wet. You could heat dry it. You could stamp with the paint. You can do all of those things. So that's the paint aspect of it. But where it becomes magical is when distress paint comes in contact with water, okay? So what I'm going to do is take that paint. I'm going to just clean this stuff up, this little bit of pink off of the sheet for now. And I'm going to add water to this, okay? Now, when I add water to this, it's going to help me kind of marbleize these colors on a surface. And when I apply it to a surface, I also prefer if my surface starts out wet. It just allows the paint a little bit more fluidity, a little bit more playtime, if you will. And because I don't want these just to be dots, I'm also just going to take my finger and I'm just going to move this out a little bit, just a little bit. I don't need to get all finger painty, but I want to at least take that out. Now, what I'm doing off camera is every time I'm touching that paint, I'm just dipping my fingers in the water and rinsing it off. This way it's not going to dry on my fingers either, but it'll wash off with soap and water. Water on the tag, or whatever paper, could be watercolor paper, doesn't matter. But then I'm just going to go in and drag this through the paint, okay? So what's really interesting when it comes to the drag is that you will see when I add water to this, and I'll even talk about the sheet, you see how the paint maintains its integrity? The yellow stays on the blue. Where you have an excessive amount of water, you can get that color to blend to green. Same thing, the pink and the yellow, they stay separate. If I continue to add some water, it'll simply marbleize over the color, and vice versa. That's what makes it really unique. It doesn't become this hot mess. So when you look down here on the sheet, the colors still maintain their integrity. Now here, when I did that crisscross, could you make mud with it? Sure, you can make mud with anything if you swirl it together. But if you're just dragging across, those things will maintain its color, and it's going to dry that way. You can let it air dry. The longer it dries, the more it will continue to bloom or wick, or you can dry it with a heat tool. If you want to move color around, like if you're like, hey, you know what, I don't like that, I typically go in and just pick up some color with my finger, or I'll just take a little bit more water. So maybe I want some of that blue to make a run for it. I can hit that blue, and there you go, made a run for it. Okay, if I want some color to go this way, I'll hold the paper, a little water, there you go. So it's pretty cool how you can manipulate this while it's wet, but once it dries, it's permanent. So that's what makes certain techniques, and I'll grab some technique tags. I'll just let that one sit there for a bit. So would I go back in here? I probably would with maybe something smaller. I would try to avoid the sludge because guess what? If it looks like sludge, it is. So if you go in, you're gonna get that sludge. But if I stick to the outside of it, I can still salvage some of that color if I want to. And the more water you have, the more fluid this is going to be. So look at how much water I'm adding to this piece. Look at that. So see how just like the thing about these paints is that whatever color is there, it will still sit on top of the other color. It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I see a question, have I tried paint on gel plate? I've seen people use distress paint on gel plate, and it works. It works different than acrylic paint, but yes, it does cool things. That is one of those things that I'm really excited about using more of this year. I have gel plates. I just got some ideas that I want to spin around in my head because I am fascinated by the gel plate. I follow several people on Instagram that I think is really cool. Okay, so this, as far as drying, like I said, the longer you let it sit, the more it's going to do its beautiful wicking and blooming, but we can dry it right away. So I'll dry this one, and I'm going to let this one just dry on its own. Mario, would you mind just, you want to
Sure.
Just set that over there.
Yep.
Thanks. Okay. I'll just dry this with a heat tool. And don't worry about the paper curling. Paper has no memory. Right now it's just moisture. So it's thinking it wants to hang out like that, and then it'll relax. Almost like a magic trick. It's like, there you go. Another thing, like if you do a lot of backgrounds and you experience paper curling or anything like that, if you have something like a Mink or any kind of laminator, just put your papers in an empty folder and run it through your laminator. Just that heat and pressure will flatten out your backgrounds in an instant. So often, you know, when I'm done with doing a demo and I have all these backgrounds that are almost flat, I just fire up my Mink, use the carrier sheet, and just run them through, you know, and then they dry flat. You could also iron them, but that's way faster. So there you go. So that's our background. So that's still a little wet. I'm just going to dab it off because it had some paint and I took it off while it was wet. And look, I got that nice little light area. But this is completely permanent. This is where things get very interesting in the world of paint. So paint, bring back one of those tags. That means paint can be used as a resist. This was stamped in paint. So when you use it, you would just use a brayer and we would brayer paint. And again, there's videos on this a lot, but you can brayer on paint. There's even a distress paint video. Just go to my YouTube channel, go under distress or type in distress paint and you'll see it. But this is stamped. You can stamp in white or antique linen or any color, dry it. That was that cool alphabet. And then we did all of our inking and stamping. So yes, you can stamp over paint. But if you want that image to stay, you need to stamp with something like archival. If you stamp with things like distress, it will work, but it will tend to smudge a little bit because it wants to resist distress ink. So your best bet is stamping with a permanent ink over paint, be that archival or be that whatever kind of permanent ink you like to use. There's our background. See? Look at that. There's our technique tag right there, right before your eyes. And so by doing it, I know right away, apply distress paint, mist with water, swipe through, splatter with water, dry with heat tool. Boom, done. And then it says, note, once paint is dry, it becomes permanent. Very important to have techniques like that. But then you could do other cool things. This is done with distress paint. I'm not going to do that today, but it's a very cool technique called eroded metallic because we're using the properties of the paint to actually become permanent and then put more paint on it, and the paint underneath it becomes permanent while the new paint is wet. Crazy fun. So that to me is what's really, really amazing when it comes to working with product. But that is really the big difference between standard acrylic paint and distress paint. Does that mean you can't achieve effects like that with paint you have? I'm sure you could play around to do it, but you saw how easy it was with just water and paint. Okay? Can you use paint with clear stamps? Of course. Yeah. It's just you're going to want to clean it off a clear stamp the same way you clean it off of a rubber stamp, which would be immediately, because once the paint dries, it is waterproof. If you need to clean off dry paint that, you know, maybe you weren't quick enough or you just forgot, just remember, you can clean up any kind of dry paint, including distress paint, just using hand sanitizer. That will soften it and that'll take it off of your stencils or brushes or stamps or whatever if you need. Okay, so far, so good. All right, so basically what it comes down to, because I know I could keep going and going and we could have this thing run for hours on end, is really to, first of all, gauge your interest in this whole concept. You know, I said to Mario, you know, for me, it's so great to have conversations with you and really help you understand products. And sometimes what I'm doing in a demo is maybe interesting to you, but it maybe doesn't answer the core questions, like when we talked about re-inking or when we talked about refreshers or all of that, how you use a product. And that is where I feel this whole Asked and Answered series is really important, because it allows me, honestly, to do them more frequently because there is no prep for me. It's in real time. It also would allow me, I think, when we talk about a specific category, that I can focus on that. Because like this one was really to get my feet wet and to get your feet wet and to see if there was even any interest in this. But future ones will be very specific. So like if it's crayons, it's just crayons. If you're like, but can you tell me how to use embossing glaze? That would be in an embossing glaze Asked and Answered. But keep in mind, anything that I'm showing, even today, that's already existed. There are videos on my YouTube channel that have done these techniques, including the paint, including eroded metallic, that even aren't in the class, right? I believe that education should be free. That's just me, and I'm okay with that. I know everybody has to make a living, so I'm certainly not saying that, you know, you shouldn't pay for classes, because I think for people teaching classes, there's a lot of time and effort that went into that, and they deserve to be compensated. I see it a little different just because I'm a product designer as well, and I want to balance you understanding the product. Doesn't mean I've not taught classes the same way like you pay for creative chemistry. The big difference is, could you learn everything in these YouTube lives that you would learn in creative chemistry? Sure. It's probably over a bazillion videos that you're going to have to find, and I myself couldn't even locate them. Whereas the purpose of creative chemistry is it's in one location, it's all digested by, you know, certain categories, it's got downloadable labels where you can print them off. I mean, so that's where the time and effort went into to really curate that class. So there's always a balance, because people say like, well, can't I just learn it free? Yes, but that's up to you now to go find it and do it. But if you're like, I don't have time to find it, I just want to sit down and I want the instructions printed for me, there's the benefit of creative chemistry.
At your own pace.
Totally at your own pace. Yeah. And it's cool also because there's a whole gallery. Like when the class was live, students could upload cards and things that they made each day, because there was a different lesson each day. So it was really cool to see me teach a technique and how the students interpreted that technique and what they did, because they would use different colors or different papers. So it was really fun. There are some bloopers.
Are so fun.
Oh my gosh, that was crazy. Yeah, because that wasn't live. That's, you know, that was before I did live, and so I think live is so much easier because I just am who I am. But I felt like when I did creative chemistry, I needed to like be a little bit more concise. So I trip with my words a lot. So I did see some questions on crayons, and I'm not going to get into crayons because I'm going to wrap this up. But Paula Cheney did a great tutorial yesterday. I think she posted on Instagram, and it's on her blog, 10 ways to use distress crayons. It's a very cool thing to look at on her blog. She just showcases like coloring paper dolls, how she likes to use them on metals, how she uses them with collage medium. But you can also, thanks Mario, you can also search distress crayons on my YouTube channel or on timholtz.com, and you'll find videos on that as well. So like I said, there's videos for all of the stuff I'm sharing. I just wanted this particular series to be more conversational, where it wasn't this full-on start to finish agenda. I could smear stuff on paper and be like, that's the answer. So I appreciate the comments. I hope that you found this beneficial. Like I said, this isn't the only type of content I'm going to do moving forward. Just when you see that Asked and Answered thing, that's the type of live that I'll be doing that particular time. And if it's not, it might say a live demo. It might say makes for Easter, or who knows what, because I had a great time. For those that were part of the Valentine live, that was a lot of fun. I made a ton of stuff. Yeah, it was 3.5 hours, which I'm not doing. But it was a lot of cool things that I was able to make into cards and projects over the, you know, I did all of those in one day, but I was able to share them in 2 weeks. And I'm not saying that to be braggy. I'm saying because that is how my brain works. Like I sat down and I'm like, I'm just going to make all this stuff today because I love to make. It's good fun. So I appreciate you guys showing up. It was good fun today. Look, it's under 2 hours, right? That's not too bad. See?
That's really good.
Got to say, I was waiting for him to say, woo, yeah. And that's me doing a lot more talk at the beginning. I will try to keep these, like hour and a half is kind of my goal. That's the sweet spot, but who knows? Sometimes it'll be a little bit longer, but yeah, it's always good fun just to think of new ways to connect with you guys and communicate. And hopefully, like I said, you found it beneficial. Oh, thanks, Rochelle. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you guys. It's good fun. So yeah, hopefully the rest of this weekend you get out some distress stuff and you play. And if any of this piqued your curiosity to learn more, go on YouTube, hit Google. Even if you don't want to go on YouTube, Google your question, and you'll probably see all the other videos from so many other talented creators out there that have shared their techniques or their expertise for that. So Google is really the best place to start, because there's a section on Google that will show you videos of what you're asking about. Sometimes they're embedded in a blog and sometimes they're on YouTube. So it was really good fun.
Your website, that search feature on the top right, I use it all the time.
It's very good. I mean, we really try to make it impactful at the same time when I'm doing a lot of videos, but you know, sometimes things are hidden because I'm doing a tutorial on something and we share a technique it just kind of slips in, which brings me to timestamps. If you go to my YouTube channel, okay, if you subscribe, that would be great. If you could, after this video is over, if you could give this video a thumbs up. So after we're done watching, if you could come back to a live or any future live or past lives, do a thumbs up, leave a comment on there. That also lets YouTube know that you are interested in my kind of content. So that little suggestion thing on the side, it will suggest videos of mine to you and other people, but it will also suggest other people's videos similar to mine that you can learn more. And I'm always learning about algorithms, but as great as a live is, YouTube doesn't recognize any of this stuff that's going on in this live. Even the chat, it's just a live right now. It's after the live when you go in and actually, engage, even if it's like, oh, hey, thanks, or even thumbs up if you don't want to leave a comment. That's totally fine. That I think is really going to be helpful. But if every single video description, I don't know how I'm going to do Asked and Answered yet, but I'm still going to timestamp it. If you find a video, like for example, Valentine's, look at that little description right under the video, and there's going to be a word at the end that says more. If you click that, it will bring up all the timestamps, meaning everything that I shared in that video by category, like when we did the pennants, or when we did the background stamping, or when we did the enameled hearts. So instead of sifting through 3 hours of video where you're like, no way, you can literally click that time in the description box and the video above it will start right at that section. So that's a great way to use any of my content on YouTube, because I know I'm wordy. I know that I like to talk a lot, but that's really where the timestamps will benefit you for any of the videos on there, where you can just click it and you can actually see like, well, what did he talk about in this video? Is it even going to answer any of the stuff I had on distress paint or crayons or whatever that is? You can just go in and kind of look at that. So to me, I think that's really beneficial, because typically I don't click the more in someone's video description. I'm like, I'll just watch it. But those help save a lot of time. So with that, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday. I'm happy that we did our first one. I can't wait to do more, because now there's so many things from dies to embossing folders to ideology stuff that I get asked all the time, that now I can really focus and answer questions for you guys. It was really, really good fun.
You did it.
So it was good fun.
We did it.
Boop, boop, boop. Oh, hey, Boo, thanks. And thanks for the questions.
Sure,
thanks for, because I'm like, I need you to watch the chat. I need you to like get as many questions. And he's like, okay, but you're talking.
And I answered like 6 of them.
See?
Yeah.
This guy knows. He's had to listen to me enough to be like, I already know the answer.
Blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah,
but I like to do a lot of
blah.
blah, blah, blah. So with that, really go out and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Saturday. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
See you next time.